Muchísimas gracias. We now commence the sessions of the third forum. The first session of the forum and fourth dialogue of Spain-India Observatory is about the presidencies of the G20, the Pacific Alliance, and the Council of European Union, the participation of Latin America and the European Union in the Indo-Pacific. I would request Mr. Dinesh Patnaik, Ambassador of India to Spain, to now speak. Okay.
Wonderful. Do you want me to speak from here? I think we will.
Yeah.
They want me to wait before I speak to you all, so let's wait.
We would now commence the session with Ambassador of India to Spain, Dr. Dinesh Patnaik.
There's too much of light. I can't see any of you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. It's really wonderful to be here. And like Sanjay said before, it's wonderful to be among friends, discussing things that we've been working on for the last 1.5 years, which is how do we bring Spain and India together. So let me start by talking about one of the most important years in Spanish history, which is 1492. You know, and the reason I'm talking about 1492, I'll tell you as we go on. 1492 was the year when Granada was conquered finally, and Spain as an entity came into form. It was also the year when Rodrigo became the Pope Rodrigo de Barajo, if I remember, he became Pope Alexander VI. Now, we won't go into what he did as Pope Alexander VI, but it was the first time a Spanish became the Pope. And also the first time that the Spanish grammar was actually written, which was the Castilian grammar in 1492. But the most important event that took place in 1492 was that Christopher Columbus managed to convince the Reyes Catholicos, Queen Isabel and Ferdinand, to do a voyage to look for Asia and especially for India. Now this changed everything. 1492 changed the way the first European empire came into being. It was the first time new lands were discovered and the first time when European imperialism actually started in a large way. And that's how the globe changed. 1492 was a critical year. Now I'm not comparing 1492 to today. But this is the first time that Spain has gone out of its own comfort zone to come to India to start something which is going to have a big effect in the future. It's actually in a way coming back to the Indo-Pacific that it tried to go in 1492. In 1492, the riches of the world were in the Indo-Pacific, were in India, China, the whole Indo-Pacific region. And that's what made European nations find a sea route to the Indo-Pacific. And today, the same thing is happening again. The riches of the world are again back to the Indo-Pacific. If you look at the Indo-Pacific today, more than 65% of world GDP, more than 55% of world merchandise trade, and more than 65% again of the world population. It's shifting, the dynamics have shifted and Spain needs to be here. So today when we are going to talk about it, when we talk about Spain and India as global partners, this sets the context. Also the context about India, because India technically never was a conqueror, never went across and conquered. We went as merchants, as traders, as people bringing religion across through culture, and we went across the world but only in our vicinity. So it was from the ASEAN countries to the east coast of Africa. We never ventured out beyond the 7 seas like it used to be said. And yet today we are a global player. A country with 4 trillion in GDP, a country with large diaspora across the world, and a country which in the last few years has reached across from Suriname, Caribbean, the LAC countries to across the world. What has happened in the last few years is the distance has stopped becoming a psychological barrier. And we have reached across. Look at Latin America, for example. Our bilateral trade has cost $50 billion. Our investment is more than $16 billion in Latin America. We are looking at India playing a larger role. Now, so why am I saying all this? It's because both India and Spain, we together actually divide the world into 2 parts. And it's important that we become natural partners. What one of the speakers before said, because we have no irritants. Now the irritants is one of the few things we always say, that we have no animosity, no historical animosity, no present day animosity. But that needs to get translated into a cooperation which is much closer than just having no irritants. And that is happening slowly. Both of us have woken up to the fact that we can work together in the European context, but also bilaterally, and work in third countries. If you look at the synergies we have synergies in every field, particularly economic field. We are one of the few 2 regions which do not compete in many things. We compete in some areas, but we cooperate in maximum of the areas. We cooperate in everything from agriculture, agrochemicals, to pharmaceuticals, health, to IT, digital services, construction, railways, mobility, you name it. On every field, we have synergies. And not only synergies between both of us, but synergies to be able to work in third countries together, in third areas together. Spain working in the Indo-Pacific with India as partner, India working in Latin America and the Americas with Spain as a conduit, as a partner. These are things which are natural synergies that we look at. And it is time that we build up this relationship where we need to work together on these issues. We have been in the last few years working together on many issues, but there are main reasons, 2 reasons which I will say, which we need to work on, why Spain and India share this vision of being global partners. Number one is we share same ideas, same concerns, and same historical experiences about global issues. And what are the global issues? Global issues are issues which no single country can solve on its own. Issues like climate change, food security, cyber security. In all this, we share similar ideas, similar outlook, similar way forward. On terrorism, on extremism, we share the same. We are historical experiences of both these issues make us natural partners when we look at looking at terrorism in a global way. On many, many issues, on protecting the democratic growth in the world. Spain has been also a recent democracy. It's what, 1986? No, 1978. And we had a democracy which has solidified itself across the world. We need to work together. So there are many global issues on which we share the same concerns. And so it's natural that we both work together. But the last one, which is most important, is that you work with countries with whom you share similar values. And this is something which over and over again, time and again in the past, countries have understood that when you work with countries with whom you don't share values, at some stage the chickens come home to roost. And it's happened with countries in Europe. They have seen with having traded, having worked with countries whom they don't share similar values of democracy, human rights, rule of law, free press, market economy. These are things which are important. At some time, businesses think that short-term gains will make these things not important, that we can overlook cultural differences and value differences and work only on business. It doesn't work. At some stage, we come back to the fact that we have to have cultural similarities, similarities in values. And that's where India and Spain come together, India and Spain in a more European context, India and Spain in a more global context. And this is something that I am looking forward to seeing in the years to come, India and Spain which works together. Like Christopher Columbus managed to convince Queen Isabel to let him go across the world to find India. I think it's time the foreign ministries convince our leadership that it's time to come together to do something great. I will finish off with one anecdote I always give. I think some of my friends would have heard it before. It's about the game of chess. You know, chess originated in India, but traveled through the Arab countries and the Moors to land up in Spain. And so when chess originally started, it was a game of war. You know, chess is a game of war. You have war on both sides. And there was no queen on the chessboard. So it was the king and a vizier. It was called a vizier that time. And the rest of them, pawn, rooks, the elephants, everything else was the same. But there was no queen on the chessboard. When it reached Spain, Queen Isabel used to play chess. And in 1492 again, there was a ballad of chess written in Spain. We changed the rules of the game of chess and put a queen in the chessboard with the most powerful piece on the chessboard, done all by Queen Isabel. So we have a classic case of a cooperation between India and Spain, which has resulted in a game which is global today. Let's start playing more chess together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, Mr. Javier Salido, Director General for North America, Eastern Europe, Asia, and the Pacific of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation, will be addressing the audience.
Thank you very much. Ambassadors, Secretary General of the Instituto Cervantes, President and members of the Council, India-Spain Council, dear friends, and I totally agree with what has been said, we are among friends here today. It's an honor for me to be here in New Delhi, here today to celebrate this third India-Spain Forum. And I think it's excellent news that after the pandemic and some very difficult years, we are able to continue the sessions that we're already started in 2014 and 2017, and particularly that for the first time, this forum is celebrated here in Delhi. I must say on a personal note that as a former cultural counselor in the Spanish embassy here in New Delhi, I feel particularly thrilled to be back at Instituto Cervantes here today. It brings back many memories of great nights and very interesting conversations here in this same auditorium. And very good to see you here, Oscar, also. The India-Spain Forum is an unmatched opportunity for the civil society of our countries to exchange on relevant issues. I always remember when I was here in India, posted a very interesting book with a very interesting title, and that was The Argumentative Indian. And I cannot but agree that if there is a common trait of Indian and Spanish population, is our love for argumentation and debate. I would like first to congratulate the Fundación Consejo, España-India, for the celebration of the forum. The Fundación Consejo, as you know, is a key tool of Spanish public diplomacy, an organization that brings together not only public officials, but also the private sector, academia, civil society, in order to explore and have dialogues on of issues of common interest. The Spain-India Observatory that has been presented here today, or the Spain-India dialogue that we are having, are good examples of the very good work of the Fundación Consejo and their team that I want also to congratulate today. I would also like to thank the ORF. We think it's very positive that we've been able to reach this agreement with such an important think tank, and that I'm sure that a lot of value added will come out of that cooperation. The forum comes at a very good moment of our bilateral relations. Both Secretary Verma and Ambassador Patnaik have mentioned the great potential that our relations have, and I couldn't agree more. Our shared commitment should be to reinforce this relationship in multiple areas: the political, trade and investment, defense, culture, tourism and education, just to name a few. These and other topics were actually recently discussed in the 7th political consultations that we had just a few weeks ago in Spain with Secretary Verma. The economic ones were also discussed in the Joint Commission of Economic Cooperation last April. As has been mentioned by Ambassador Patnaik, economy is probably the area where we see most potential in our bilateral relation. We think that Spain, which is almost a 50 million country, a population of 50 million, and with $30,000 of per capita income, offers good opportunities for a country like India to do business. We are convinced that bilateral contacts are essential to bring this relation forward. I would say that the last year has provided numerous opportunities for this kind of high-level bilateral contacts. After the visit of Minister Alvarez in June 22, the presidency of India of the G20 has offered opportunities for several authorities, high-level authorities of Spain, to come to India. The Vice President for Economy, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Culture and Sports have been in their ministerial meetings here in Delhi and in other countries in the region. President Sanchez, unfortunately, was not able to participate in the summit in Delhi due to COVID, but he was substituted by the Vice President of Economy and the Minister for Foreign Affairs. On the other side, in Spain, besides Secretary Verma, we recently had the visit of Ms. Mamata Banerjee, Chief Minister of West Bengal, who was in Madrid and Barcelona, and also the visit of Chief of the Air Staff, Mr. Vivek Ram Chaudhary. All of these have taken place very recently. However, let me just focus and say a few words of the issue of the first session of the forum today, and those are the concurring presidencies of the G20, the European Council and the Pacific Alliance by India, Spain and Peru. We must say that the current international system is a very complex situation right now. The instability caused by conflicts, such as the illegal aggression of Russia against Ukraine, or the crisis that we are now seeing in the Middle East, in Gaza, add to challenges that already existed and that were mentioned by Ambassador Patnaik: climate change, public health issues, financing for development, or the reform of the global governance. There are no easy solutions to any of these challenges, but we must face them and address them together. Spain is glad to count on India in order to, and cooperation to face these challenges. Both countries, we believe, are committed to a rules-based international order. In this context, as I was saying, both Spain and India have seen their profiles raised in 2023 by the presidencies of the G20 and, for India, and the 6-month presidency of Spain of the Council of the European Union. Indian presidency of the G20 will finish in just a few days. Spain is, as you know, is the only permanent observer, permanent invited country to a G20. It's a very peculiar and special status that allows us to participate both in the summits and in all the preparatory meetings in the process. We give a very important value to that participation. I would like to congratulate India on their presidency of the G20. We think it's been very successful, and its focus on inclusive and sustainable development has been very relevant. This is a priority that Spain shares, and actually, as you might know, Spain has offered to host the next Financing for Development Summit that will take place in 2025. From our side, as I was mentioning, Spain is also close to concluding its 6 months presidency of the European Council, which began in July. As one of the major members of the European Union, Spain, the Spanish presidency has given us a very good opportunity to push our priorities and our interest in the EU agenda. Among the priorities, I could mention issues such as the economic recovery, energy security, sustainable development, or strategic autonomy. Regarding foreign relations, we have been pushing for closer ties with countries in Latin America, the southern neighborhood, and also for the implementation of the Indo-Pacífico strategy. There have been activities all over the country, I think a little bit like in India with the G20. But among them, I would like to highlight the meeting of the European political community that took place in Granada on October, the EU-CELAC summit that took place in Brussels in July, that is a meeting of the European Union with countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. The Samoa Agreement, and I actually am coming here right from Samoa last week, which was the EU agreement with Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. And in the coming weeks, actually, the EU-China summit that will be taking place in Beijing in the 7th and 8th of December. Regarding EU-India relations, I must say that we are particularly satisfied that the momentum that followed the 2021 Porto Summit is keep well alive and kicking, I must say. We have the EU-India Trade and Technology Council, the Connectivity Partnership, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor that was announced during the G20 Leaders Summit very recently, and we particularly have the negotiations for an FTA. There have been already 6 rounds of negotiations between the European Union and India. We think that an FTA is a key framework for fostering our economic relations, but for it to work, it needs to be substantive. It needs to be meaningful and not just a name. For this reason, we think we need to keep working on issues that are fundamental for both sides, such as sustainable development, labor rights, and the environment. An FTA basically gives incentives for our companies to make business with each other. So if we don't arrive to a true liberalization of our bilateral ties, the FTA will have no point. We are, however, optimists in making progress, and we definitely see a political commitment on both sides for a successful negotiation. We hope that the EU-India summit, that should be celebrated at some point either by the end of the year or most probably early next year, will also offer a good opportunity to advance in these and other dossiers. I would like just to make a brief comment on a very transcendental meeting that will be taking place in just a few days, the COP28 in Dubai. Again, on this issue, we need to be ambitious. The window of opportunity is rapidly closing for limiting the increasing temperature to 1.5 centigrades. The EU is fully committed to the fight against climate change. And together with the EU, the member states, and the European Investment Bank are actually the largest climate finance contributors. About 1/3 of public climate finance is provided by the European Union. We are open to more cooperation with India on climate-related issues. A good example of that, bilaterally, is Spain's membership of the International Solar Alliance that has been promoted by India. We would also, on our side, welcome India's participation in the International Drought Resilience Alliance, IDRA, that was launched jointly by Spain and Senegal in COP27. Climate change is gravely affecting also droughts all over the world, and we think that further collaboration on this issue is essential. I would like to finish this intervention without mentioning two key foreign policy concerns. The first one is the current crisis in the Middle East. Spain condemns the attacks by Hamas and recognizes Israel's right to defend itself. However, at the same time, we think that this right must be exercised in accordance with international law, protecting civilians and assuring access to Gaza for humanitarian personnel. in the medium term, the only viable solution to achieve a situation of stability and peace in the region is a two-state solution, as has been endorsed by the United Nations. We hope to work with India on this dossier as also a key partner on the global scene. The second one is the war in Ukraine, which continues as one of our top foreign policy priorities. It's an issue that is closely followed by the public opinion in Europe in general and in Spain in particular. As you know, we have condemned from the very beginning the Russian aggression against Ukraine as a flagrant violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, particularly to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The violations of these principles establishes a very dangerous precedent in an international order in a world where geopolitical balances are changing. Both Spain and India have worked to uphold these principles, and we think that we must continue to cooperate in the face of Russia's actions which pose a threat to the peace and world stability. In conclusion, as I was mentioning before, remembering my readings of the argumentative Indian, I think that one of the greatest assets of our democratic societies is the possibility to engage in frank and open discussions. At a moment where India is consolidating its role as a consequential geopolitical actor, both in the Indo-Pacific region and globally, and also when Spain is playing a key role as a driver of the policies of the European Union, an $18 trillion economy, and with a particular also projection for Spain in Latin America and Africa, I think that these exchanges are more relevant than ever. In this sense, I am looking to the discussions that we will have during the following day, and particularly to the start of the panel right after me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. I now hand over the stage to the moderator of the session and our eminent speakers, Ms. Shairi Malhotra, Ms. Amaya Sanchez, Mr. Samir Patil, Mr. Javier Pulinich, and Mr. Javier Hill.
Should be green, I think.
So no?
No.
Can everybody hear me now? Yeah? Okay. So good morning, everyone.
No.
Let's try this again. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this inaugural panel of the third edition of the Spain-India Forum. And this is a very significant forum because it's the first time that it's taking place in New Delhi, in India. And we have with us now to discuss a very relevant topic, which is the three presidencies, the G20 presidency, the Pacific Alliance presidency, and of course the presidency of the EU Council. And each of these presidencies represents, I would say, very different geographies. So the scope of the panel ahead is huge. I'm sure the G20 presidency really needs no introduction after the kind of year we've just had. The EU Council presidency as well perhaps needs no introduction. But I will briefly introduce the Pacific Alliance to you all, which is a grouping of 4 member states, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. And really the aim of this grouping is to enhance economic integration between these 4 countries, but also to engage more with markets in Asia and the Pacific. And this will in fact be part of the second leg of our conversation today. So let me just quickly start by introducing our esteemed panelists. We have with us here Ambassador Javier Pulinich, His Excellency Ambassador of Peru to India. We have with us Amaya Sanchez, who is Associate Analyst at the European Union Institute for Security Studies, Samir Patil on my right here, who is Deputy Director at ORF Mumbai. And on my left, Javier Gill, who is Professor and expert on the Indo-Pacific at the University of Comillas. Myself, I'm Shairi Malhotra, and I focus on your Research Foundation here in New Delhi. So if I could just request the panelists to keep their interventions crisp and concise so that we can get in as many questions as possible and also have the opportunity to involve the audience. So without further ado, let me just start with you, Ambassador, if I may. Could you tell us a little about the Pacific Alliance presidency which Peru currently holds? I believe it got this presidency in August this year. Could you tell us what this presidency actually entails and how Peru is approaching it?
First of all, thank you for the invitation to participate in this important event. First of all,
It's not working.
hello? It's green. It's green. Yeah. Hello? Hello?
Oh. Acércatelo con la mano, ¿sí? Mira, a ver.
Hello?
Arbit again.
Hello? First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of this forum. Let me talk about Pacific Alliance itself. Altogether, these four countries, we represent the 8th largest economy in the world and the 6th largest exporter globally. Represent 45% of GDP in the region, 60% generated of trade, and we attract around 45 foreign and direct investment in the region. As you can see, is, let's say, a very powerful grouping in the region. But a part of that, the Pacific Alliance is the only economic mechanism who its priority is to the Asia-Pacific region. In fact, it's part of the constitutive charter. In terms of our presidency, as temporary presidency, we identified that the main objective for us is to strengthen the capacities of micro, small, and medium enterprises. Why? Because the SMEs is the main source of employment in the region, with a very important impact in the social fabric. Secondly, we would like to be more efficient in the cooperation with the observers state. Pacific Alliance has now 63 countries as observers. And the third priority is the accession of new states to the Pacific Alliance, mostly Ecuador and Costa Rica, and to increase the number of associate states like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Korean Republic in terms of establish a free trade agreement with them. More or less, this is the priorities.
Thank you, Ambassador. Javier, if I can turn to you. Regarding the 6-month Spanish presidency of the Council of the EU, of course, this is currently ongoing, but it's in its final stages and it ends in December. The Spanish presidency did come at a very critical moment, given that it's perhaps the last presidency and the last opportunity to finalize pending files and legislation before the EU goes into elections in 2024 and a new commission is created. What have been some of the priorities of the Spanish presidency of the EU?
First moment, thank you for organizing this, chairing this session. It's okay? Vale. So basically, yes, basically in Europe we are experiencing some, troubles during the last years because of the COVID, because of the war in Ukraine, because of the war between Hamas and Israel now, that is terrible, because of the instability in the Mediterranean, especially in the Sahel region in Africa. So basically, I think we have adapted, to this, scenario of tension. So basically, Spain assumed the presidency of the Council of Europe in July 2023. And basically, our government designed, five priorities that have reduced to three. The first one, basically, in the dimension of the economics. Basically, one of the main goals of the Spanish presidency was to continue with the reindustrialization of the European Union economy, especially paying important attention to research, development, and innovation. I think that we believe that without technology we cannot advance, as society, so that is critical. Second, we have paid a very important attention to the climate change, the fight against climate change, and the transition, basically to green energies. That is a key topic in Europe, and I think that is paramount for all of us, especially for India. And third, regarding in the area of economics, we have paid special attention to social justice and to basically to the development and consolidation of the welfare state. That is a critical feature of Europe. And in the area of politics, basically the President has defended the strategic autonomy of the European Union. We believe in the project of the European Union as one of the most important regional institutions in the world. Basically, we have paid special attention to the guarantee of the supply chains of food, energy, health products. We have dedicated special attention to two important regions for Europe. One is Latin America and the Caribbean, also very important for India, because now the trade between India and Latin America basically has exploded. And especially to the Indo-Pacific, later we'll comment it. And finally, the last priority has been basically to guarantee or to maintain the unity in Europe now. We are facing many challenges, many dilemmas. Basically, our presidency has tried to guarantee the unity supporting Ukraine, almost 2 years of war, so a terrible war. So basically, we continue supporting Ukraine against the brutal aggression of Russia. That is very clear. We have, let's say, continue supporting our commitment with NATO as one of the most important, allies providing security to Europe. We have paid special attention to our neighborhood, especially in terms of security. The Balkans, the Western Balkans, the situation there is becoming more complicated. Of course, in the Mediterranean and the Sahel, I commented. And we have paid a very special attention to the Indo-Pacific. Basically, we have been supporting the European Union strategy for the Indo-Pacific. We have been supporting the role of Europe as a global maritime power, especially in the Indo-Pacific. And basically, we have been supporting the trade with the Indo-Pacific. So basically, our priorities have been in terms of regions or geography, Latin America, the Indo-Pacific, and of course, to defend the project of the European Union.
Thanks, Javier. I'll take my cue from you and try the same tactic as well. Samir, I'd like to bring you in now. India has just recently concluded its G20 presidency. What, according to you, have been some of the successes of the Indian G20 presidency? And what do you hope to see the G20 as a forum achieve under the Brazilian presidency going ahead?
the green light. No green light. Now, can you hear me?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Shairi, for that question. I would actually list out three key successes for India's G20 presidency. First is, as we discussed, because of the many geopolitical developments, really the international consensus has, in a sense, collapsed because of the polarization and all the geopolitical developments. And I think the fact that India was able to forge a consensus and a unanimous approach to tackle some of the pressing global challenges such as food security, climate change, technological advancements is something that is remarkable. Of course, we have to see now, because of what is happening in the Middle East or West Asia, whether that consensus sustains. But at least New Delhi has offered the hope that the pursuit of national interests did not come at a cost of international cooperation. And I think that is, in a sense, one of the biggest success of the G20 presidency under India. The second I would list is basically reviving the focus on the global south. We have seen that, just before India did a deep dive in its presidency, in January 2023, India held the first virtual Voice of the Global South summit, where 125 nations participated, and where they were able to put out their concerns and aspirations, and also their take on the global developments, to discuss challenges such as debt burden, food security, as well as the digital divide. I think in that sense, the voice of the emerging economies, something which had been on the periphery for a very long time, was heard for the first time. And the fact that, as Secretary Verma said, for the first time that African Union became the member of the G20 grouping, really puts the global south at the center stage of the G20 process. And in a sense, it shows that, that it will be no longer a mute player or a silent spectator to what is happening globally. The third is making the G20 really a people-centric initiative. This presidency of India was unlike any other presidency of the G20 in terms of outreach to people and really making them the part of the global conversations. And just as one example, because we have been part of the ORF has been part of the Think 20 process, our process itself convened about 113 experts from the G20 members beyond and across 7 task forces. In addition, the Secretariat hosted 80 conversations in 15 states of India and produced 300 plus policy briefs authored by 1,000 plus authors. And in that sense, we really made an effort to have the citizens part of this global conversation of the G20 conversation. So those will be the 3 successes for the G20 presidency. Now, under Brazil, I hope to see, again, 3 things. One is continue the momentum of addressing the critical global challenges, and one of them being the reform of the multilateral institutions. We know that the UN Summit of the Future is scheduled to take place in September 2024, so just around the G20 summit in Brazil. So I do hope that the G20 persists in its focus on the reforming of the multilateral institutions to make them more effective, more coherent, more accountable, and more representative. The second is the harnessing of technology for good and as an enabler for the national development. We have already seen the phenomenal transformation that many countries have undergone because of the digital public infrastructure, and I hope that Brazil's to improve basically access to digital service, bridge the digital divide, as well as build a capacity of some of the non-G20 countries to leverage the digital technologies. And finally, I think Global South, again, I expect Brazil's presidency to really find more ways of engaging with the Global South, perhaps by hosting some outreach events in the African continent, and also maybe explore some synergies with the Pacific Alliance members. So.
Thank you, Samir, for that introductory intervention. Amaya, I'd like to bring you in now, and ask you about the second leg of this discussion, which is EU and Latin American participation in the Indo-Pacific region. Could you tell us about the EU vision for the Indo-Pacific, and more specifically, could you situate India and the broader South Asian region within this vision for us?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm not going to risk it with the mic, so go ahead. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Shaili, for your question. If I may backtrack a bit, the EU vision for the Indo-Pacific sort of goes back to the EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific launched in September 2021. That's the sort of landmark event. And if I may sort of frame that too in a broader context, I'd say we're in a situation where obviously there's the EU having to position itself within the space of the China-US conundrum, for one. A whole lot of emerging countries, including Asian emerging countries, highly competitive, increasingly competitive geoeconomic environment, where the EU itself, which just launched its own economic security strategy, had to position and secure its economic security as well. There's the other part to it, and it's been mentioned today recurrently, the whole idea of the rules-based order, values-based foreign policy. I think it has been a real challenge for the EU too, obviously because, again, the situation in Ukraine, as well as the current situation in the Middle East. So the EU, being a historical normative power, has had to sort of position itself, and I would argue be much more pragmatic and sort of find a way to deal with this. So within that broader context, for the EU, and Spain comes into this because Spain goes by the EU vision for the Indo-Pacific. There's several member states which have their own strategy. That's France, Germany, the Netherlands, Czech Republic, and I think Lithuania as well. But the bulk of them do follow the EU vision and the EU Indo-Pacific strategy. So within that, I would argue, this is my own view, that in India and South Asia fit in well with this, and I think that the EU has to, in a way, on the one hand, sort of find a way to deal and engage with the regional middle powers, and these are not necessarily only the usual suspects, meaning beyond Japan, South Korea, Australia. We need to also think of Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, the Gulf countries. These are huge, UAE, Saudi Arabia, so we need to definitely bring those into the fore. That's one aspect. The other aspects, I would argue, are specific sort of sub-regions. I think it's in a way flawed to only think of the region as Indo-Pacific. It'd be more useful, for example, there's growing literature on the Indian Ocean only, or for example, the Northwest Indian Ocean, which is very strategic for India as well, obviously. So I'm thinking if you go from, and this is a core maritime area of interest for the EU, so if you go from, for example, the Red Sea, down to the Mozambique Strait, eastwards to the Strait of Hormuz, down to the Maldives. This is also extremely strategic for South Asia, obviously, and India, so I think that's to be taken into account. And finally, in terms of actual sectors that are relevant to India, I would argue in South Asia, I think maritime security is at the core, not only in terms of the traditional security, I would argue, so thinking of, for example, livelihoods, very relevant to the small island nations, small nation states of the Indian Ocean. So I'm thinking anti-piracy means of livelihood, for example. I'm thinking definitely of clean energy, digitalization. So there's a whole lot of sectors that the EU is trying to sort of target via the EU global gateway. And I'll stop here because I think I've been talking too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Amaya, for laying out that overview of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. Ambassador, if I may come back to you, what is Latin America's view of the Indo-Pacific region? Because, you know, here in India, we talk a lot about the Indo-Pacific, but a Latin American perspective is really not one that we get to hear about at all. So how does, what do you see as Latin America's role in the sort of evolving dynamics of the Indo-Pacific region?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. in fact, the Indo-Pacific concept is new in Latin America, I must say. We used to talk about Asia-Pacific as such, including the Pacific Alliance efforts to strengthen its relationship with the Asia-Pacific. Nevertheless, it's a reality, and we cannot ignore realities, of course. But at the present, I think the best way to address this Indo-Pacific reality is bilaterally, step by step. It's the only way that we can, at the end of the strengthening the bilateral relation, especially with India, we can have a clear idea about the value of the Indo-Pacific. For instance, my country is negotiating a free trade agreement with India. We are in the 5th round of negotiations. We are going to have the 6th in more 10 days. I hope other Latin American countries can follow this example, because if we strengthen our relationship, especially in the economic and trade fields, I'm sure will be very good foundations to understand and to follow the Indo-Pacific. But unfortunately, it's not right away the situation, but I hope we will be very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Javier, I'd like to return to you. Given your expertise as a professor on the Indo-Pacific region, I'd like to ask you that, despite all the problems that Europe is currently facing, including full-fledged war, it is still paying a lot of attention to developments in the Indo-Pacific region, and security in the Euro-Atlantic sphere is increasingly being linked to stability in the Indo-Pacific region. How would you do you see the potential for trilateral cooperation between the EU, India, and Latin America going forward in the Indo-Pacific region? And of course, we're going to be talking more about this aspect with a particular focus on defense and capacity building in our next panel. But how do you more broadly assess the potential or prospects for trilateral cooperation between these three regions in the Indo-Pacific?
That's better. So, yeah. Yes, I think there is some room for collaboration. Basically, Latin America and the Caribbean, the LAC countries, European Union or Spain, India, I think we are compatible. I don't see, let's say, big problems, among us. I don't see lack of trust. I think that we share, values. We respect, or we agree on multilateralism. So I think that we can work together. In fact, I think we agree on the most important thing, and that is that the center of gravity of international relations has moved, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and this is very important because sometimes we forget, to the Indian Ocean. So, for me, the Indian Ocean has become, let's say, one of the two epicenters, of international relations. So what happens here, very close in the Indian Ocean is critical for Europe and is critical for Latin America. Having said that, I think we have to focus on soft, topics to collaborate, at least in the very beginning. I think, just to mention some of them, I think, for example, India is facing wonderful challenges in the future. Right now, the population in India is 1.4 billion. By the end of the century, according to the United Nations Development Program, population program, population of India will be 2 billion. So one of the challenges that India is facing in the coming future is how to feed so many people, providing, water, electricity, and so on. So one of the first key areas, to collaborate in this, triangle of love is basically we have to collaborate with India to improve the agricultural output, and especially the productivity of the agricultural sector. In Spain, we are the we are the champions of agricultural production in Europe. We provide food to the rest of Europe. And in Latin America now is exporting commodities to India, not only minerals, so basically food, from soybean to anything that you can imagine. So I think that in both areas, Latin American countries, Argentina, Peru, Uruguay, Brazilians, Colombians, and Spain, of course, we have a lot of, let's say, expertise to collaborate with India. How? Pues basically transfer of technology from the private sector to the private sector in India. University programs, that is very important, the collaboration in the academia. And that is one point. A second point of collaboration, I think feasible collaboration, is basically supporting trade between Latin America, Europe, Spain, and India. We have the problem of distance, we have the problem of cost of trading. So I think we have to improve logistics, connecting Latin America, Europe, Spain, and India. And here Spain has an important role to do. Spain is Spain in the logistic performance index, that is an index that basically evaluate, how we move, goods, ranks in a very high position. So I think we can collaborate with India, especially with India, basically to improve logistics in India. So how to improve roads, the train sector, the ports, airports. So basically all the assets involved in moving logistics. That is very important. And especially now, the timing, I think, is very good for collaboration between the three areas, because Narendra Modi, as you mentioned before, he announced, the establishment in the future of the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor. So I think it's good from Spain, especially from Spain, to support, this corridor and to connect India, Spain as the geopolitical, let's say, power in the south of Europe, connecting Europe and Africa, the Mediterranean and Atlantic, and then to Latin America. So that is perfect. And finally, just to say something more, I think ocean governance is very good point. Spain has a vast experience in the maritime domain. In fact, we have two archipelagos. We have been operating in the Atlantic. We have been operating in the Mediterranean. We have a lot of experience fighting against piracy, against criminal activities, and at the same time, protecting the sea. So I think, especially in the Indian Ocean, a very busy sea log of communication. So I think it's very important. And finally, just 1 minute. I think we can explore, somehow a trilateral, dialogue between India, probably European Union or CELAC, or EU. If you want to be less ambitious, we can explore, a possible trilateral dialogue between, for example, Spain, India, and I don't know, Argentina or Brazil or Mexico. No? So I think it's good to replicate some of the dialogues that India is involved, for example, with Japan or with the United States. No? So that is my point. So it's possible.
Yeah, I think it's very much the era of trilaterals. But Amaya, bringing you back in, and Javier touched upon Spain's reindustrialization and this being one of the priorities of the Spanish presidency. And Spain really has been at the forefront of this whole debate on open strategic autonomy, where the EU wants to secure its supply chains, diversify, and reduce its lopsided dependencies on certain countries. And in this context, it is looking more and more at Latin America, where Spain is a sort of bridge, and also India, of course. How do you see economic prospects between these three regions, but more specifically, how do you see connectivity and infrastructure initiatives such as the Global Gateway shaping up?
Okay, thank you, Shadi. A very broad question. I think I'll probably perhaps dwell a bit more on the EU Global Gateway and then think of it, sort of focus more on the region we're talking about, really, the Indian Ocean, and then also Southeast Asia, and then Latin America, if that's all right. I'll try to be brief. So for those of you who don't know, I think most of people would know, the EU Global Gateway was launched December 2021. Ideally, you wouldn't conceive it as a attempt to counterbalance the BRI, but de facto, I would argue, it is. We're not the only ones. In the sense, there's also, the PGI, there's the Japanese FOIP, India has its own IPOI, SAGAR. So there's a whole range of connectivity initiatives taking place. I think that the sort of key challenge, if you will, the EU Global Gateway, it's 300 billion euros, half of which is targeted to Africa, actually. So the other half is for the rest of the world. And I think the challenge has been to really take off. They have now, you can have a look, there's an EU Global Gateway website where they have all the different flagship projects. And I think there is, for example, certain identified projects already in South Asia. I would argue not so many. There's one Nepal, another one in Bangladesh, focused on clean energy. So core focus on climate change, clean energy. And then there's more, actually, on Southeast Asia. I think the core focus there is, again, clean energy, climate change. There's the Green Initiative focused on ASEAN. There's a very interesting project in the Philippines where they're actually trying to combine, on the one hand, the digital transition, linking it to then using the information from the satellite, Copernicus, using that to give data for climate change and, again, clean energy. There's the whole I think emphasis on strengthening the ASEAN electric grid interconnection. So there's the bulk, I would say the core is digitalization and clean energy. Again, a lot more could be done, and I think it's in the making, if you will. And I know we're writing on this too. There's the perspective that perhaps, and hopefully it's not too little too late, but I think, again, we need to give the EU sort of the benefit of the doubt in this respect. In terms of Latin America, and I would like to point something out because I think it is important, there's a sense that the EU has, in a way, forgotten somewhat about the region. And I think this year there was this big summit, the EU CELAC, taking place in July in Brussels, which was an attempt really to re-engage with the region. The fear is, on the one hand, very, very strong Chinese presence, also Russian in another way. Obviously, Chinese focus on resources and the economic dimension, the BRI playing a key role. And I think from an EU point of view, there's the sense, okay, we cannot be perceived as coming in and doing resource extraction. That's kind of the fear. So I think the EU Global Gateway, again provides this very good channel to come in and say, okay, again, digitalization. There's a Digital Alliance, which was signed December 2022, I believe. Yeah, which was a key landmark. And I think, again, lots of focus on that. And I think clean energy and climate change are the two key areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Samaya. Bringing the conversation back to where we started from, which is looking at the three presidencies. Samir, back to you. These are three presidencies with of course very different mandates because they're covering very different geographies and themes. But there are certain areas and themes that do run common through all three presidencies. And I guess digital is one of them, and that's a space that I know you track very closely. According to you, what have been some of the critical areas of convergence between these three presidencies?
Thank you. So I think one way to look at it is the fact that, for instance, the Spanish presidency, in a sense, attempted to foster the development of strategic industries and technologies in Europe, and that came from the recognition that the EU was excessively dependent on the third countries, on the digital technologies. We know that last year, the EU adopted its strategic plan on the digital technologies, where it basically talked about achieving the goals of digital transformation with the in line with the European values. And one of the goals under that was basically ensuring the security and sustainability of the digital infrastructure, as well as digitizing the public services. Now that, in a sense, highlights the role of digital public infrastructure, which we know that India has talked a lot about during its G20 presidency, but it's something which also aligns with the Pacific Alliance, because the Pacific Alliance also has a digital agenda, and one of the main pillars does talk about improving the access of the citizens to the digital government and the digital governance services. So in that sense, that can become one critical area of convergence. The second is Of late, we have talked about and have seen the proliferation of the generative AI tools, artificial intelligence tools like deepfake, ChatGPT, and those kind of things, which have really provided opportunities for the malicious threat actors for misuse as well as causing chaos. Again, as part of the Council of the EU Presidency, Spain has talked about promoting AI as well as other high-impact technologies such as quantum technologies, and it also aims to promote the respect of fundamental rights in the use of AI. Now, again, that is something which aligns with India's emphasis on AI. And if you look at, for instance, the G20 declaration, which came out at the end of the New Delhi summit, it had mention about the responsible AI. It talked about the fact that the G20 leaders were committed to leveraging the AI for public good, for solving the challenges in a responsible, inclusive, and human-centric manner, while protecting people's rights and safety. So that becomes the second area of critical convergence. And the third is, I think, cybersecurity, again, which is, in a sense, not explicitly mentioned by any of the three presidencies as such, but we know, for instance, how, the Russians have weaponized the cyberspace in the aggression with Ukraine. We have also seen now during the Israel-Hamas conflict how cyberspace has become the extension of their geopolitical rivalry. We have also seen the proliferation of the ransomware incidents and the spurt which has caused in cyber crimes. So in that sense, I think we need to invest more in the resiliency and securing of our citizens as well as the digital infrastructure. And I think I think cybersecurity can become that third area of critical convergence for all the three presidencies.
Thanks, Samir. Ambassador, if I could pose one last question to you before we open it up to the floor and to the audience. So India, throughout its G20 presidency, has tried to ensure that development concerns do not fall off the global agenda, given this period of high volatility that we are currently going through. As a continent that represents the global south, how do you think India's amplification of the voice of the global south has made a huge difference?
Thank you. Yes, I think from the point of view of the interests of the global south, India played a very important role. We welcome this pivotal role because as a turning point, I can define this G20 presidency of India as a turning point in terms of one country, India, sensitive to the problems and topics regarding to the South Globe, were put it in the table of the agenda of the G20. And I think this is very important because with the support of India, of course, we have the guarantee that the G20 can be more sensitive to the needs and interests of the global South. Of course, the now membership of Africa is quite important. I hope Latin America will be the next new member. But in any case, congratulations to India.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that very optimistic assessment. If I can just open, we have a couple more minutes, so to questions from the audience. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and do we have more mics to? Anybody here, just here on the front?
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the organization of this forum, Spain-India. I am Victor Echeverría, Ambassador of Colombia. I would like to raise a question regarding the role that Spain could play in the relationships between the Pacific Alliance and India. And Spain has put a foot on the region since a long time ago. A lot of investments, very important investments in our countries. I'm talking not only in Latin America, but specifically on the Pacific Alliance as a region. So you have a lot of expertise in energy, in all kind of productions in the region. So now, the Pacific Alliance is very focused now on small industries. You, Ambassador Javier, mentioned that. But also in the process of reindustrialization. If you check the balance of trade of Latin America and India in trade, we are exporting oil and minerals. This is not the real aspiration of a region that wants to be reindustrialized. And Spain has a role to play in the region. And meaning, India has a lot of knowledge in very specific strengths like technologies of information. We want to be reindustrialized with more added value to our products. We don't want to be selling oil and minerals. And we don't want to be just the buyers of products. So we need a deeper participation in the industrial production of the region. And I think that Spain has the strength and has the history and the knowledge about the region to do it. In the afternoon, you will be talking about the value of the language for this. So this beloved institute, Cervantes, that we all Latin Americans, we love it so much, it's so useful for us, could play a very important role if you are going to go on business and investments from India to Latin America or the Pacific Alliance. It's very good that you enhance the knowledge about the Spanish. You have to be doing business in Spanish. We cannot do it in Hindi. It's very difficult. So you can play a very important role in many areas. So I would like to, this was not really a question, this was an intervention, I'm sorry for that. But I would like to ask you, do you think that really Spain, very focused on the Pacific Alliance, can play this linkage role between our region and India?
I think, Javier, would you like to answer that?
Do you want me?
I think Javier.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think we are in the early stages of this trilateral connection between Spain, India, and Latin America. But let's say that there are some important points, of agreement and collaboration, to reindustrialize, or basically to increase the value of the Latin American exports, in this case to India. I think one is, the language is very important, so I think here we have, all of us, all the Latin Americans, we have a responsibility for teaching Spanish, especially to Indians, Yesterday I was completely taken aback, when I discovered that 50 million of Indians are interested in learning Spanish. My personal experience with Spanish and Indians is very, very special. My wife is from India, so I have my family, part of my family is living in India, in Mumbai, in Delhi, in Bihar, and other part of my Indian family is living in the United States. Typical, no? Indians living in the United States. And my nieces in Texas are studying English and the second language in Spanish. So it's like, oh my God, how is this possible? So now my daughter and my son are, speaking with their nieces in the United States in a mix of Mexican and Spanish from Spain. But anyway, so this is the circulation of language. So I think that point. And second, I think the Spanish private sector has important role in modernizing the extractive, basically industries of Latin America. That is one point. And second, it's true that you are exporting mainly commodities. That is minerals, oil, copper, and other minerals, and agricultural products. But I think it's possible to increase the value of that products. In Spain, I remember, because I'm from La Rioja, a very agricultural, region. One of the main, values of our economy is the quality of our products. So basically, we don't just, let's say, exports, agricultural products. So we export, high quality agricultural products. So basically, we were able to increase the value of our commodities. So I think that is something that Latin America can do it. So basically, increase the value of the commodities, I mean, to put some kind of, I will say, transformation of the commodities before being exported, basically to make them more expensive, and second, to increase the value of the agricultural product. And there, Spain has a lot of experiences in both sectors, industry and agriculture.
Thanks, Javier. Do we have any more questions or comments anywhere? Can you raise your hand? Yeah, there's someone right at the back.
First of all, I would like to thank Institute of Cervantes for organizing this wonderful forum. So my question is regarding the India, Middle East and Europe economic corridor. With the recent war going on in the Middle East, and we know that the corridor goes through Saudi Arabia as well as Israel. So will the war put the plan in jeopardy for the corridor?
I think Amaya, would you like to take that, given your expertise? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I do think it'll have an impact. I don't know if you know much about the corridor, but it has two sort of legs to it. One is linking India to the Gulf, the eastern corridor, and then there's the western corridor, which links the Gulf to Europe. What's interesting is that neither Israel nor Jordan, which are neighbors, have actually signed the MOU for the corridor, but that they're fundamentally important for this to happen. They are the sort of linkage there. So I think this is very problematic because it is largely, I think, also not just economic, but also a political project. So the fact that at the moment with the Israel-Hamas war outbreaking, I mean, clearly the relations between Israel and Jordan are not at their best. We'll see what happens with Israel, the UAE, and the big sort of prize, which would have been the normalization of relations through the Abraham Accords of Israel and Saudi Arabia, is also now pending from a thread, right? So yes, I do think it's still to be seen. Again, however, we do need to distinguish between the sort of eastern bit of the corridor and the western bit, and I think there's also a sort of internal Gulf component to it which could flourish. So yeah, it's good to distinguish that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amaya. I think we're running out of time, so maybe you can ask your question in the coffee and networking break that we have right now. So thank you so much to the panelists for enriching the forum with their very rich perspectives. Thank you to the audience for listening in. We are breaking up for a break now for about half an hour, and then we re-meet at, I think, 11:45 for the next panel. Thank you, everyone.